Welcome all viewers to our channel. We are glad to see you here, where we share amazing stories from people's lives. Each of you is important to us, and we will be interested to know what country and city you are from. Please write about it in the comments. Now let's move on to our first story. Michael Walker, a 34-year-old black man, a successful lawyer and respected member of his community, was driving home late at night from a legal conference. His black sedan drove smoothly down the empty highway, lit only by the glow of his headlights. The radio played a jazz tune softly, soothing him after a long day. Suddenly, the blinkers of a patrol car turned on behind him. At first, Michael thought it might not be for him. He slowed down and pulled over slightly to let the police car pass. The sirens continued to blare, however, and the lights focused on his car. Michael sighed heavily and pulled to the curb. His heart beat a little faster. He knew he hadn't violated anything. The speed limit was fine. The papers were in order. The car was registered. But inside him, deep down, there was still fear. There had been times in his life when the color of his skin had attracted unnecessary attention, especially from the police. He turned on the emergency lights, shut off the engine, and slowly put his hands on the steering wheel. A few seconds later, a tall white man in uniform and officers, with a stern face and a cold stare, approached his car. "Good evening," Michael said, trying to look calm. Officer Reiner only glanced at him, not even bothering to greet him. Instead, he slowly looked around the car and squinted. "Is this your car?" he asked sharply, ignoring Michael's politeness. "Yes, sure. All the paperwork's in order. I can show you." Reiner smirked, but there was nothing friendly in his eyes. "Show me your license and registration first, slowly, so I can see your hands." Michael carefully reached for the papers, pulled them out of the glove compartment, and handed them to the officers. Reiner took the papers, but instead of looking at them, he stared at Michael again. "Do you know why I stopped you?" "No, sure. I didn't violate anything." The officers leaned closer and Michael could smell cigarettes and coffee. "Look, I don't care what you think. This ain't LA. This is my turf, and I won't have people like you driving around." Michael felt goosebumps run down his spine. The night was just beginning, and he already knew he was in for a lot of trouble. Michael stared at Officer Reiner, trying to keep his composure. His instincts told him that the man was looking for an excuse to make his life difficult. "Sure. May I ask the reason for the stop?" Michael asked, keeping his tone even. Reiner hummed as if he'd heard the joke. "A reason? You look suspicious. Is that not enough? Or have you decided I need permission to check you out?" Michael swallowed, trying not to lose control. "I have not violated anything and all my documents are in order. If you have a reason to check, I am willing to cooperate." "Cooperate?" The officers came even closer. "Listen up, smartass. Your bullshit doesn't work here. You think wearing a tie and driving a nice car makes you a better person." Michael lowered his gaze so as not to provoke. He'd heard of situations like this. It was a game in which the loser lost more than just his dignity. "Get out of the car," Reiner ordered. "Sure," Michael began, but the officers interrupted him sharply. "Are you deaf? I said get out of the car." "Ah." Michael took a deep breath, removed his seat belt, and slowly opened the door. He stepped out, trying to keep his hands where he could see them. Reiner circled him like a predator studying its prey. "Oh, look at that. That's a nice suit you got there. Where'd you steal it?" He said, tugging Michael by the lapel of his jacket. "Sure, this is my costume, and I'm asking you not to touch me. Please, do you think anyone here will listen to your requests?" Reiner laughed, but there was a threat in his laugh. At that moment another officers, a young fellow with a short cropped blonde head, approached them. He stood aside, watching, but did not interface. "Reiner, are you okay?" he asked uncertainly. "Everything is under control," replied the senior officers. "I'm just having an educational conversation with our friend." Michael felt the tension in his body grow. He realized that this friend sounded like a taunt, and that the whole situation could get out of control at any moment. "All right, so be it. Show me the trunk," Reiner ordered. "Sure. Do you have a search warrant?" Michael asked calmly, trying to remind the officers of his authority. "Warrant?" Reiner stepped sharply toward him, almost close. "Did someone tell you you had a license? Or do you think you can lecture me on the law?" The officer was no longer hiding his irritation. His hand reached for his baton, and Michael realized that the situation was becoming dangerous. "Just open the trunk, or I'll do it myself. And I'm warning you, if I find anything, you're going to jail." Michael wanted to object, but realized he had no chance against such a determined man. Slowly, feeling his hands shaking, he made his way to the trunk to carry out the order. Behind him, there was the sound of footsteps crunching on the pavement. Reiner followed, smirking as if anticipating how things would turn out for Michael. Michael walked to the trunk of his car, his fingers trembling slightly from the exertion. He tried to breathe steady, but it was hard not to give in to the growing fear. He knew the trunk was empty. It contained only his personal belongings and a few documents from the conference. "Come on, hurry up. I don't have time for you," Reiner growled, standing behind Michael. Michael opened the trunk, revealing its contents: a suitcase, a folder of papers, and a shoebox. Nothing out of the ordinary, but that only seemed to make Reiner angry. "What have we got here?" The officers roughly began rummaging through the trunk, throwing things on the ground. His movements were devoid of any respect. A suitcase was opened and overturned, a folder with papers scattered on the asphalt. "Sure, these are my personal belongings. You have no right," Michael began. "I don't have the right." The officers turned sharply toward him, glaring menacingly. "You dare to tell me what I can and cannot do?" Reiner took a step forward, and Michael instinctively took half a step back. "Let me guess, you're one of those smart guys who thinks the law is a defense for people like you. You know what I think. The law is whatever I decide it is. I didn't break the law. I have all my papers in order. You didn't find anything suspicious." Michael tried to remain calm. Reiner snorted, then subtly grabbed Michael's wrist and yanked him so that he lost his balance. "You may not have violated, but with people like you, it's a matter of time. You're always hiding something. You just haven't gotten caught yet." Michael felt anger flaring in his chest, but he suppressed it, realizing that any resistance could be used against him. At this time, the second officers, who had been standing aside, hesitantly moved closer. "Reiner, would you stop it? There's nothing here." "What's all this for?" he said quietly. "Shut up, Royce," Reiner said, not looking at his partner. "I'm teaching him to respect authority. People like him don't understand that until they're put in their place." Michael clenched his teeth, feeling the blood pulsing in his temples. "Sure, I don't want to provoke conflict, but this is out of line." "Are you telling me what to do again?" Reiner grabbed Michael by the shirt, pulling him closer. "Here's your problem. You talk too much." Then he let go of him with such force that Michael almost fell backward. "Okay, let's do this." Reiner looked at the second officers. "We're going to detain him now for resisting." "Resistance?" Royce asked in surprise. "Yes," I said. He fought back. "That sounds pretty convincing, doesn't it?" Reiner grinned. Michael realized that the case was taking an even more dangerous turn. It was clear to him that this man was ready to fabricate an accusation to justify his actions. "Sure, I didn't resist. You have no proof," Michael said, looking Reiner straight in the eye. "Evidence? You think this is a trial?" Officer Reiner laughed, and there was an icy cruelty in his laugh. "There are no witnesses here but us. And guess whose word will matter? Michael realized that the situation had reached an impasse. He felt utterly defenseless in the face of a man who held his fate in his hands but had not an ounce of compassion. Michael tried to keep his composure, though fear and anger fought within him. Reiner stood in front of him like a predator, enjoying his power. His partner, Royce, was hesitantly shifting from foot to foot, clearly unsure of what to do. "Officer, I'm asking you to stop this," Michael said, raising his hands in a gesture of reconciliation. "I'm cooperating, and I'm not doing anything illegal." "Cooperating?" Reiner bowed his head as if thinking. Then his face contorted into a grin. "Then, maybe you can explain what exactly you're doing on this road so late." "I'm coming home from work. I'm a lawyer. I was at a conference." "A lawyer?" Reiner laughed loudly, as if he had heard an absurd joke. "Come on, don't make me laugh. You don't even look like you could graduate from college." Michael felt his fingers clench into fists, but he quickly pulled himself together. "You can find my diploma in the database," he replied calmly. "Oh, you're the one who's going to tell me what I'm supposed to check." Reiner stepped closer, his face a few centimeters from Michael's. "You know what annoys me most about people like you." Michael remained silent, realizing that any word could escalate the situation. "Your bullshit sense of grandeur. You think just because you have a tie, and manners, you're above me. You're still a nobody. Just remember that." Suddenly, Reiner abruptly grabbed Michael's arm and slammed it behind his back, forcing him to bend over. "Hey," Royce suddenly objected. "This is too much. He didn't do anything to." "Shut up, Royce," Reiner cut him off sharply. "This is none of your business. I have the situation under control." Michael grimaced in pain, but didn't scream. "Sure, this is way out of line. It's a misuse of force." "Oh, unlawful use of force," Reiner interjected. "You think anyone here cares about your rights?" The officers then loosened his grip, but his tone remained threatening. "Listen to me carefully," Reiner whispered, looking Michael in the eye. "If you complain or, God forbid, write it down, I'll make sure you spend the night behind bars. And there, believe me, the boys won't be as kind as I am." Michael felt a cold sweat roll down his back. He was trapped. No one around him could help him, and the man who should be upholding the law was breaking it himself. "Do you understand me?" Reiner asked, taking a step back. "Yes, sure," Michael replied briefly, suppressing the urge to object. Reiner nodded, as if savoring his victory. "All right, then stay here and don't move while I figure out what to do with you next." Michael stood on the side of the road, clenching his fists so that his nails dug into his palms. He realized that any movement or word could be interpreted by Reiner as a threat. Reiner, for his part, continued to walk around as if enjoying this power. "So, you said you were a lawyer." The officers stopped in front of Michael, his eyes burning with anger. "That's funny. I think guys like you usually work somewhere in the cleaning business." "Sure, your words," Michael started to say, but Reiner interrupted him. "My words what? Insult you? It hurts to hear the truth, doesn't it?" Royce, who had been silent until now, finally dared to intervene. "Reiner, come on, you're overreacting. It's not like we found anything on him. Why keep doing this?" "Shut up, Royce," Reiner threw sharply, not even turning to his partner. "If you can't be useful, go to the car and wait there." Royce looked confused, but didn't move. It was an insignificant, but still a show of resistance. Michael decided to try a change in tactics. "Sure, I know you're doing your job, but I have to go. I have a family waiting at home, and I'm not a threat to anyone." "Family," Reiner hummed again. "You mean any of the normal people agreed to be with you?" Michael felt his throat constrict, but he remained silent. "That's what I think," Reiner continued, grinning as he headed toward Michael's car. "You're too sure of yourself. You think because you have a nice car and you're dressed like a clown, it's going to save you." Reiner went to the driver's door and opened it without asking permission. "What are you doing?" Michael asked excitedly. "Checking to see if there's anything illegal in here," Reiner said, peering brazenly into the cabin. "What if it's drugs?" He pulled some papers, a pack of tissues, and an old map out of the glove compartment, tossing them on the seat. Then he opened the console between the seats, found a bottle of water, and dumped it on the pavement. Michael couldn't take it anymore. "Sure, this is an abuse of your authority. You have no warrant or reason to search the premises." Reiner turned around sharply, his face red with anger. "Listen to me," he growled, coming in close. "One more word, and I'll find a reason to hold you. Do you understand?" Michael felt the adrenaline rush into his bloodstream. He wanted to answer, but he realized that was what the officers wanted him to do. "Yes, sure," he said muffled, suppressing his anger. "Good for you." Reiner grinned. He turned away and began rummaging through the car again, as if he were deliberately slowing down to make the process as long as possible. At that moment, Royce took a few steps toward Michael and said quietly, "Just stay calm. He will sometimes overreact, but the less you react, the sooner it'll be over." Michael wanted to say something, but held back. Royce didn't seem intent on hurting him, but he wasn't going to actively defend him either. Reiner finally slammed the car door shut. "Okay," he said, pressing his lips together in a dismissive smile. "I haven't found anything yet, but that doesn't mean you're clean. People like you are always hiding something." Reiner approached Michael again, his eyes glittering with gloating. He savored every second of it, feeling power over a man he didn't think deserved respect. "All right, Sparky," Reiner said, folding his arms across his chest. "You think I'm gonna let you go? Oh, we found something interesting here." Michael tensed, not realizing what he was talking about. "What do you mean? You didn't find anything in my car." "Oh, that's what you think." Reiner slowly pulled a small plastic bag from his pocket with something white inside. Michael frowned, his breathing quickening. "What is it?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. "This is what you've been hiding in your car," Reiner said with a chuckle, holding the baggie in front of his face. "It's a lie?" Michael said sharply, feeling panic rising in him. "That's not mine. You planted it yourself." Royce looked like he'd been punched. "Reiner, what are you doing?" he asked quietly, taking a step forward. "Shut up, Royce," Reiner snapped at him. "You're not a part of this." Michael tried to gather his thoughts. "Sure, this is absurd. You have no proof whatsoever that this belongs to me." "Proof?" Reiner laughed. "Me words are enough. Now listen to me carefully. Unless you want to spend the rest of the night in a cell, where you'll be quickly taught manners, you'll do whatever I say." "You want me to plead guilty to something I didn't do?" Michael could barely contain his anger. "That's right," Reiner said, moving closer. "Or you'll have to face the consequences." Royce, clearly shaken, stepped closer. "Reiner, this is too much. You can't do this. It's gonna be on both of us." "You're here for appearances, Royce," Reiner said coldly. "So if you're not willing to play by my rules, you'd better get out of here." Michael realized that this conversation wasn't going to change anything. He was alone against a system that protected people like Reiner. "You're committing a crime," he said calmly, looking straight into the officer's eyes. "I am not afraid of you." Reiner frowned for a moment, then his face contorted with anger. "Aren't you scared?" he asked, grabbing Michael by the collar. "I'll show you what it means to be afraid." Reiner shoved Michael roughly back against the car, his shoulder hitting the cold metal. Royce stepped forward, but Reiner stopped him with a look of fury. "Stay out of this, Royce," I'll take care of this myself. But he didn't do anything. The young officers tried to object, but his voice sounded too weak. Reiner pulled his baton from his belt and tapped it slowly against his palm, as if weighing how to use it. So here's what we're going to do, Smarky, he said, turning to Michael. You get in your car now and write a confession. That you were carrying those drugs. That you were going to sell them. Michael felt himself getting dizzy. Sure. Do you realize this is a fabrication? I'm not writing anything. Reiner grinned. Then get ready for a long night. Maybe more than one? He stepped forward, holding the baton in his hands. Are you threatening me with violence? Michael mustered the rest of his courage not to look away. Me? Never, Reiner said mockingly. I'm just trying to convince you. Royce, who was standing off to the side, began nervously looking around as if he was looking for a way out of this situation. Reiner, that's enough. We can't do this. It's not right. Shut up, Royce, Reiner shouted. You want to go against me? Then you'll be next. Michael realized that his only chance to save himself was to get Royce to intervene. Listen, he said to the junior officers. You see what's going on. This is illegal. You can stop him. Royce hesitated, his face a struggle. He knew Reiner was breaking the law, but he was afraid of the consequences if he went against him. Royce, this is your chance to do the right thing, Michael said, his voice firm despite his fear. You can't help him, Royce, Reiner said coldly. This guy isn't worth your career. Silence hung in the air, the tension so thick it could be felt physically. Michael stood staring straight at Royce, hoping that he might have a conscience, but Reiner drew his attention back to himself, swinging his baton. You have one last chance, he said to Michael, moving closer. Are you writing a confession, or? Reiner didn't finish, but his intentions were clear. Reiner slowly raised his baton and pointed it toward Michael with a contemptuous smirk. What, you scared? This is just the beginning. Smartapants. Michael didn't move, his body tense and his heart pounding so loudly he thought he could hear it. He realized that any movement could be a reason for the officers to act. I'm not afraid of you, Michael said, his voice steady, but fear raging inside him. You can threaten me, but the truth is on my side. Reiner laughed, and that laugh was cold and cruel. Really? What truth? The truth is, nobody's gonna take your word for it. This is my road, my town, and everything here is done by my rules. He grabbed Michael's shoulder sharply, his grip painful. Did you say something about abuse of power? Well, I'll show you what it looks like. Suddenly, he hit Michael's leg with the club, causing him to fall to his knees. Michael gritted his teeth in pain, but didn't make a sound. That's better, Reiner said, looking down. You look much more natural on your knees. Reiner, that's enough, Royce finally shouted, his voice louder than before. You're out of line. We can answer for this. Shut up, Reiner shouted, turning to his partner. Are you suddenly a lawyer for this bastard? Royce stepped closer, his face expressing determination. I can't keep quiet when you mock a man who has done nothing. Reiner frowned. His eyes narrowed. He dropped the baton to the ground and stepped close to Royce. Do you want to go against me, Royce? He hissed. You little brat. You think you can tell me what to do? Michael took advantage of the moment and slowly got to his feet despite the pain. He watched the confrontation between the two officers unfold. It's not against you, Reiner. It's for law and justice, Royce said firmly. You crossed the line, and you know it. Then prepare for the consequences, Reiner hissed, clenching his fists. Michael realized that the situation was heating up. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was sure that Reiner wouldn't stop until he felt victorious. Reiner stood waiting for Royce's reaction, anger flaring in his eyes. He could see that his partner, once quiet and submissive, now looked determined, and it pissed him off. Are you going to be a hero, Royce? Reiner glanced at him mockingly. What happens when I give you the last word in this story? Royce remained silent, but his shoulders were clenched and his fists were white with tension. He tried to find the right words to avoid further conflict, but he couldn't say anything, afraid that his weakness would be seen as a betrayal. Michael felt his heart beating faster and faster. He could see that Royce was on edge. The officers was clearly not ready to go all the way, but he had no other choice. Michael could only hope that Royce would make the right decision without losing himself in this hell. You can't keep doing this, Michael said, turning to Royce. You know what's going on here. You see Reiner breaking the law. You can't be a part of that. Royce stood for a few seconds with his arms crossed over his chest, but something new flashed in his gaze. He looked at Reiner and took a slow step back. This isn't right, Reiner, Royce said, his voice shaky but determined. We have to stop this. Reiner brushed him off with a look as if he were nothing. So you've made up your mind. You're gonna defend this criminal and turn me in. You know it's gonna cost you your career. I don't care about my career if I have to protect people from people like you, Royce replied, looking at Michael again. Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. There was something in Royce's eyes that changed. Reiner didn't seem to have expected this turn either. His face reddened with rage, and he stepped forward. Are you serious? Are you trying to turn me in? Reiner hissed, grabbing Royce's shoulder. I said it was wrong, Royce repeated calmly, pulling away from his grip. Are you out of your mind? Reiner was on the verge of exploding. You're on the other side of the barricade. What? You want me to pay you for this? You want blood on your hands, too? Michael could see the tension building between the two officers. He knew that the situation was about to get out of hand. Stop it, Michael shouted. You have no right to do this. No one has the right to humiliate me. Royce turned to Michael, and there was sympathy in his eyes. You're right, we were on. I can't ignore it anymore. Reiner gave Royce a hateful look. He took steps toward his partner, but there was no confidence in his movements. All that was left was anger. As a last defensive reaction, do you want to play by the rules? Reiner asked ominously, clenching his fists. Then you'll learn what happens to those who find the courage to go against me. But Royce, not giving in to the provocation, turned around and raised his hand as if trying to stop Reiner. That's enough. You can't keep this up, he said firmly. At that moment, Michael felt everything around him freeze. Tension hung in the air. He knew that their lives could change dramatically at this moment. Reiner stood there, looking at Royce with such hatred that it seemed he could have thrown himself at him instantly. His breathing was heavy and his fists were clenched white. But Royce, despite his indecision, stood confidently, not backing down. Have you decided to be a hero, Royce? Reiner hissed again, his voice tense as a string. You just signed your own death warrant. Royce didn't answer, but his gaze was determined. He could no longer look at the dirty methods his partner was using. You can hate me, Reiner, Royce said calmly, but you can't keep doing this. We're police officers. We're supposed to uphold the law, and you're not doing it. You're breaking it. Michael stood, amazed at what was happening. He could feel his own strength being restored when Royce didn't let up. There was something strong and sincere in his voice that awakened Michael's confidence even more. Reiner snorted and took a step back. He was insulted. He hadn't expected this from his partner, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He tried to save his face, but there was malice in his eyes. You're going to ruin everything, Royce, he said, looking at him coldly. You have no idea what you'll be up against if you go on. Royce turned slowly to Michael and nodded, letting him know he was on his side. There was more than support in that gesture, it was a decision. Royce had chosen truth and law, despite the threats and consequences that would follow. You're right, Michael replied, and there was gratitude in his voice. "Thank you. I should have done this a long time ago," Royce said, turning his gaze to Reiner. "All I'm asking for is honesty, and I can't keep quiet anymore when I see it." Reiner clenched his fists again, but when he saw that his intimidation tactics were working, he clenched his teeth and stepped aside. There was coldness in his eyes, but an anger in his soul that he couldn't express. "You'll regret your choice," he told Royce before turning around and heading for his car. Royce and Michael remained standing, watching him go. Their hearts continued to beat fast, but now with the feeling that the worst was over. Royce looked at Michael, his face weary, but it was also relieved. "Are you all right?" Royce asked, trying not to look too worried. Michael nodded, though his body still bore the marks of pain from what had happened. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt that now was his chance to change everything. "Thank you," Michael said, his voice sincere. "I thought no one would help me." Royce sighed and shrugged. "I had to intervene. I can't let people like him do whatever they want anymore." Michael felt his breathing even out a little, and realized with relief that he had a chance at freedom, and more importantly, the truth. But this victory was only the first step. From this moment on, his life and Royce's could change forever. "Well," said Royce, after a pause, "I think we should take care that it doesn't go without consequence." Michael nodded, preparing for the next step. He knew there would be difficulties ahead, but now he had an ally. The next morning was sunny, but Michael couldn't enjoy the warmth. Instead, he felt anxious and fearful of the upcoming trial. He was glad that Royce supported him, but he knew it could cost both of them dearly. Michael Saturday in a small room in the police station, waiting to be called in for questioning. Royce was beside him, but his face expressed doubt and sadness. He felt guilty for letting his partner down, but deep down he knew he had done the right thing. "Are you sure they'll believe us?" Royce whispered, looking at Michael. "I think they'll try to make me look guilty." Michael knew it was entirely possible. The police system often protected its officers, even when they behaved inappropriately, but he felt he had to fight for his justice, no matter how difficult it was. "We have to try," he said firmly, "even if it's difficult. We have to prove the truth." Royce nodded, but his gaze was full of doubt. "I'm not sure I can stand up to them. It's like going against the wind." "Sometimes you have to go against the wind to get stronger," Michael said, trying to cheer up his friend. The investigator entered, and both men fell silent. They knew that an important battle was beginning, the battle for the truth. "Good morning," the investigator said, though his voice was cold and aloof. "We are ready to begin." They approached a small interrogation room, where the prosecutor was already sitting. The prosecutor was an experienced lawyer who specialized in police cases. He immediately tried to assume a position of dominance. "To begin with, you both realize that your side is accusing Officer Reiner of abuse of power and illegal actions," he said, looking at Royce and Michael. "That's a serious charge, and I'm sure we have the evidence to support it." Royce sighed and looked at Michael. "We stand for the truth," he said firmly. "Reiner broke the law, and I saw it with my own eyes." The prosecutor squinted and made a note in his notebook. "Yes, but you do realize that we have testimony and evidence to back up what he said." He glanced at Michael, as if anticipating his consternation. "Evidence," Michael said, despite his fear. "The ones that were planted in my car." The prosecutor grinned as if expecting this question. "We are confident that this evidence will make a difference. It's not just words against words. We have evidence that backs up what he said." Michael felt his heart sink. He knew this was a battle not for life, but for death. If he was accused, his life would be ruined. "But we have proof too," he said firmly. "We filmed everything on our cell phones. We saw everything with our own eyes." The prosecutor made a note and looked at Royce. "Did you really videotape the whole thing?" he asked, and there was doubt in his voice. Royce nodded, not trying to hide his confidence. "Yeah, I got it all. It might confirm my version of events." The prosecutor looked at both men and frowned. "We will look at that video, but I hope you realize that we have other evidence that may affect the case." The investigator nodded, agreeing with the prosecutor. "Let's start by watching the videotape. That will be the first step in our investigation." They turned on a videotape of Royce filming Reiner threatening Michael and trying to tamper with evidence. When the tape ended, there was tension in the room. "Is that really what it was?" the prosecutor asked, looking at Royce. Royce nodded, his eyes serious. "Yes, that's exactly what it was." The prosecutor looked at Michael and sighed. "Good, that adds weight to the case. We'll continue with Reiner's interrogation." The next few days were a real test for everyone involved in the proceedings. The court hearing, in which Reiner's name was involved, gained public attention. The news was full of rumors and speculation, and protests supporting Michael and Royce were increasingly seen on the streets of the city. While the truth could no longer be hidden, one important question remained: could they win this trial against such a powerful adversary? Reiner, for his part, was still confident of his immunity. He and his lawyers did everything they could to disavow the evidence, especially the videotape that made him look like a major lawbreaker. Every day he came to court with a confident, almost aggressive posture, trying to show everyone that he had lost nothing. Michael Saturday in the courtroom corridor, glancing nervously at Royce, who seemed to continue to struggle with internal conflict. His doubts were growing by the minute. Although his choice was obvious, he continued to worry about his career. The more he saw Reiner manipulate the process, the more he felt himself drawn into the system he was so desperately trying to escape from. "Are you sure you're going to be all right?" Michael asked, his voice quiet but full of anxiety. "I don't know," Royce answered, staring in front of him. "We did the best we could, but you've seen how they work. It's like a game where they control all the cards. But the truth is on our side. That should be enough." Royce sighed, and his gaze darkened for a second. "They could ruin everything. You realize how they could affect the trial? All those connections, all that money." Michael shook his head. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. He looked into Royce's eyes and said, "We can't let them win. I won't keep quiet even if I'm threatened. I've seen what Reiner did. If they win, they'll keep doing it and we'll live with it. I won't be able to look other people in the eye, knowing that we allowed this to happen." Royce sighed, but nodded. He knew Michael was right. Overcome with fear, they had both decided that they would fight to the end, no matter the consequences. When Reiner's lawyers entered the courtroom, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. They held a set of documents in their hands, but everyone present realized that it looked more like manipulation and lies than real evidence. Reiner was a master of deception, but today he was faced with people who were ready to expose him. A simple but important phrase came out of attorney Royce's mouth as he stood up to begin his defense. "We stand behind the truth, not the game. And if the evidence is on the side of the accused, we will not be silent." The judge, watching every word, kept the tension in the room in check. This was not just a trial, but a fight for justice. At one point, after the prosecutor offered to review the new documents, Michael felt his shoulders relax. Royce was right. Sometimes you just had to not give up, despite all the threats and manipulation. The trial continued. Not everything was settled, and there was still a struggle ahead. But deep down, Michael knew that now he had a chance at the truth, and no matter what happened, he and Royce had already beaten the system, at least on that level. Thank you for your attention, and for letting this story be a part of your day. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. See you again.